Hi, Lisa Marie Kosas of Global One Health. In this video, I want to talk about the kettlebell sumo deadlift. While deadlifts are very commonly associated with barbells, of course you can certainly use dumbbells or kettlebells with them as well. The primary difference is going to be in how you set up your position, right, in your leg and foot position in relationship to the ground, as well as your hand position based on which prop you are using. So for the kettlebell sumo deadlift, the first thing you want to do is you're going to be setting your feet up and your legs a little bit wider than you would for a barbell. And keep in mind one very important footnote based on leverages. For example, I have a shorter trunk and a longer leg. Someone who has a longer trunk versus a shorter leg, and the length of your arms in relationship to your torso, these differences in leverage are going to affect positioning somewhat. So I'm going to give you the basic guidelines. You will want to fine-tune your position for yourself to put yourself in the most ideal setup to keep yourself safe. And if you're not sure, of course, having a coach who is an expert or a certified professional will always be able to set you up in the best position. So keep that in mind, that position does vary slightly according to the relationship of your arms, trunk, and legs to each other. Okay, so in the kettlebell sumo deadlift, you're not going to be quite as wide as a squat, but you're probably going to be a little bit wider and more externally rotated than in a conventional deadlift with a barbell. So that's the first setup. So I'm going to be, I like to kind of use a clock as a gauge. I tell my clients somewhere between 11 and 1 and 10 and 2 in the clock. Again, the degree of external rotation is going to be dependent upon your mobility. So a very important thing is you want your knees to track your toes. What does that mean? The center of your kneecap, your patella, needs to be in line with your second, third toe. So if I'm overly turning out my foot, you can see how my knee is kind of facing more to the screen, but my toes are facing more laterally. That is going to put a lot extra torque on your knee joint. And if you don't have pain initially, over the course of time, you are wearing away at the cartilage and the structure of the knee. So very important that your lower leg and foot are not more externally rotated from the knee down than the external rotation happening at the hip joint from the hip to the knee. So a very important footnote when setting yourself up. A little good drill that I like to do is to start in neutral with the right width and then think about using, right, we talked about those corkscrew muscles of the hip. So you want to think about externally rotating the femurs, the thigh bones, in the socket. So I lift up the ball of one foot into dorsiflexion. I use my lateral rotators of my hip, and when I reach kind of that range, I drop the foot down. This way, I'm tracking out properly external rotation from the hip, not just setting my feet up in a turned out position and my hips don't have that much range. So always think about the corkscrew happening from your hip joint, and you want to be using the lateral rotators. From a profile view, you're locking in external rotation or the corkscrew muscles from the proper place, and it should happen at the hip joint. Now, the position of the kettlebell, again, I'll show you from a different place, perspective of profile versus front. For the kettlebell sumo deadlift, you want to have the kettlebell positioned in the middle of the 2 feet, kind of right adjacent to the insteps, so not forward, maybe even a slightly bit more back. So somewhere adjacent between the ankle bone and the instep of the feet is where you want the kettlebell to be for the deadlift. Obviously with the barbell, there's a slight difference in position, but that is for a different context, right? Now, when holding the kettlebell handle, same thing with the barbell, you want to clench grip and the hand grip on the bar, or here in this case, the handle, and you want to corkscrew the arms. So from a front view, I'm going to hinge at my hips, I place my hands on the handle of the kettlebell, okay? And then I want to grip on and corkscrew. So you can see the corkscrew very clearly from here. So I would engage my core. I'm driving my legs down into the ground and corkscrewing, right? So I'm locking all of that into position first. Then I already have my hands kind of in that more together position. So I'm not floundering. I don't want to look down at the kettlebell when I'm doing that. So I'm going to hinge at my hips. I'm going to come down, grab onto my handle, and then I'm going to grip it, and I'm going to corkscrew it like I'm going to break the handle in half. Okay, so let me show you that from the side view. So, set up, I set my feet up lateral adjacent to the kettlebell. I'm going to engage my core, my glutes, quads, and hamstrings. My lats are engaged. Hands are together. I'm in a hinge. Right here's my crease of my hip. This is, right, and I talk about this, the difference between a squat and a deadlift in a previous video in this hip series. So if you're not sure of the difference between those two movements, mechanically, I break that down and it's just, there's no weight involved. It's just showing you the mechanical position of the body and how they are different. So I'm going to put my hands here so you can see from a profile view, right, that's where I'm hip hinging from. So you don't want to do a deadlift, and an important footnote, don't start to do this with a weight if you don't have the mechanics correct in your body, meaning I don't want to bend over and pick up the kettlebell this way or the dumbbell, whatever weight I'm using, it wouldn't even matter. If my mechanics and my form isn't good, that is a critically important factor. So here's the hinge of my hip. So that's where I am hinging from, or the crease of my hips, I should say. So a nice drill that I learned in my SFG certification with Strong First is, in the beginning, if you're not sure, just training that position of using that flat edge of your hand, right, that's where your hip hinge should happen from, right? You want to maintain a neutral spinal line is critically important in all squats and deadlifts, right? So I'm going to hinge at my hips. I'm going to reach my hands down to find the kettlebell. Once I'm in position, now I'm already driving my legs and feet into the ground. I'm still corkscrewing from my lateral glutes. I'm going to grab the handle of the kettlebell. I'm going to break the handle in my mind. There's that corkscrew. I'm going to pack in my lats. And then from here, I drive down more with my legs to stand up straight for the lockout. So I wanted to show you the lockout from the profile view so that I'm absolute vertical plumb line, right? I don't want to lean back. This is not where you want to be. That is going to put extra load on your lumbar spine and the joints of the discs at the back. You want to be locked out. Now, what that means is everything here, I'll show you with this hand, is engaged. I also don't want to be flared out. I'm going to talk about the lockout specifically in a separate video, but I want to feel like everything is engaged in my core, my lats, my glutes, my legs. Now I keep that tension I've created and I go back to that hip hinge and I want to retrace my path. I stay locked in my lats until the bell is all the way down. Notice I've maintained neutral spine position. Again, I lock in, I press down through my legs and feet, make sure my lats and core are engaged. I drive down with the legs, come up to a vertical position with the bell. Everything is still locked in position, full activation throughout the whole body. And then I keep all that working tension I've created as I go back into my hip hinge, place the bell down. Notice my focus is staying straight forward the whole time. So the key is the negative or the descent of the movement is just as important. In essence, that's where you build your strength. So it's not coming out of the deadlift. It's same thing in a push-up. It's not coming out of the push-up. It's not the harder variation of the movement or direction where you build your strength. It really is in the negative, because when you're putting your muscles in their lengthened state under tension, that is where you build strength. So very important, never cheat your negatives. Keep that contraction and that activation throughout the whole structure of the body, while deadlifts specifically target the posterior chain, right? As I hinge or pitch forward, I'm loading my erectors, glutes, hamstrings. And speaking of hamstrings, when we talk about that, is when loading, right? Loading is the lengthening phase of the muscle. As I pitch forward, hinge at my hips, you want to go to where you feel this nice tension in the hamstrings, right? A loaded tension, a stretch, but an engaged stretch. And that's right. So I'm in essence thinking about reaching my sits bones back in energy as I go into that hip hinge. So that's another cue or clue that you can think about when you're going into that. But look for, feel that active engagement of the hamstrings as you're hinging, and get that length in the hamstrings, because that is how you really load them properly. And then you want to drive down in the leg energy into the ground to bring the body up to vertical. So that is proper technique for, and don't forget, clenching and corkscrewing at the shoulders and gripping, breaking the handle. And the breath. Yes, of course. So what I like to do for my breathing is really thinking about engaging the core as much as I can, but I can start with a diaphragmatic belly breath in, right? And then I lock into position. So I want to start the exhale with that pelvic floor, abdominal wall contraction, glutes, right? I create that tension in the body. And then as I hinge over and grab, I come up And at the top, at the lockout, I do a forceful exhalation. So just I'll do another rep showing you that breath and how I integrate that all together. So I engage, corkscrew, lock down, get my breath, go into my hip hinge, grab onto my bell, lock up my lats, and there you have it. So you can also do a tst, right? It's how I learned from Strong First, tst, like you're forcing the air out through the back of the teeth. So in any event, you don't want to be finding your breath or breathing in your transition. You want breathing to be biomechanically matching your movement for maximum success in your lifts. Very, very important, especially as or if your goal is to lift heavier, more towards moving heavier loads. So that is the Kettlebell Sumo Deadlift.